everyone, I'm Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I have a perfect fall and winter recipe. It's my honey roasted apple cake from What's for Dessert. I recently went apple picking, made some apple butter, maybe you caught it on my Patreon because we're making some recipes for that too. And this is just a really great, simple apple cake. Also something you can make all winter long with no hand or stand mixer required. One thing that happened with the development of this book is I did a bunch of recipes and then I decided I didn't like any of them and I changed them all. And so I had previously developed an apple cake for the book that just didn't feel like it was the apple cake I wanted it to be. And I just sort of kept tweaking and tinkering until I got a version that I felt like checked all the boxes, that was easy to put together, had a lot of apples, had the texture that I wanted, and looked really beautiful. And so it is an oil-based apple cake, and that's important because an oil-based apple cake is typically what you have for Rosh Hashanah, for the Jewish holidays, so there's no dairy in it. And it's sweetened with honey, which again makes it perfect for Rosh Hashanah, where you eat apples and honey together, but it's also just like a really excellent apple cake any time of the year if you have some apples around. And I'm gonna pre-roast the apples, so that's really the key to this recipe, is pre-roasting the apple slices so that they give off their juice and soften. And then when you go to cut into the cake, you don't have any crunchy starchiness or any areas of the cake that are soggy because the apples released all their juices. So this is my ideal version of apple cake, and it just looks really beautiful. Very simple ingredients. I'm using 2 pounds of apples. These are small medium apples, so I have 6 apples here. One is, what were these called?
Portland, and then
red cord or something?
Yes, I think it was red cord, and it was also pink slipper.
I don't think any of those were the names. I don't know. Okay, the point is, I went apple picking yesterday. I tasted the apples and I picked ones that were very, very firm and crunchy and also had good sweet-tart balance. Not too sweet, not too sour. In the grocery store, I recommend Pink Lady. That's really the best kind of standard grocery store variety. You just want something that holds its shape and doesn't break down, although a little bit of breakdown is okay because that just gets all folded into the batter. The other ingredients are really, really simple. I have honey, olive oil, vanilla extract, demerara sugar, all-purpose flour, 4 large eggs, apple cider vinegar. Then I have cinnamon, ground nutmeg, as well as ground allspice, and then salt, baking powder, baking soda. Special equipment, very little. In terms of assembling the batter, you really just need a couple bowls and a whisk, but you do need a 9-inch springform pan. So this one is not really springform, but it has a removable bottom. That's important, that makes a pretty tall cake. And then I have a large piece of parchment that I just press in, and I'll talk about why you want that in there. Oh, and also a mandolin. This is not required, but it's very helpful for slicing the apples very thinly. Often with a springform pan, even the best pans, you often get a little bit of leakage so that if there's something very liquidy, it can seep out. And I don't want that to happen because I'm going to pre-roast the apples in the pan. This is the pan in which I'm gonna make the cake, but also roast the apples. And as the apples roast, they're gonna release all their juices. And I just want the parchment to catch all those juices. And then I'm gonna leave it in the pan and then just pour the cake batter in. And I actually just think it looks really pretty to have the parchment folded around the cake, kind of like a present. Why do I pre-roast the apples? This is my honey roasted apple cake. What happens if you don't roast them is, one, the apples don't really have a chance to fully soften in the cake if they go in raw. And I like to have a really soft, tender texture to the apples, not really a crunchy texture, because I want to be able to spoon into it. Another thing that would happen is the apples would release their liquid into the cake, and you get little gaps around the slices, or the area of the batter that's right up against the fruit, it gets really wet and it doesn't fully bake through. So I think pre-roasting is a really necessary step to getting that perfect apple cake texture. So I want to slice the apples. I'm not going to peel them because I really like the look of that very thin ring of red and green. A little bit of unevenness, especially if you're doing it by hand, is not a big deal. So what I like to do is I'm going to shave off just a little piece of just the skin basically from one end. I'll snack on that. So if you have an apple core, you're gonna go ahead and core the apples, and then I'm gonna go about 1/8 of an inch thick. Could be a little, I wouldn't go much thinner than that because the slices will almost just kind of disintegrate. You just want an even thickness. So when you're using a mandolin, I think I've covered this before, but you wanna have your palm holding the piece of food in place, and you want to have your fingers up and away. You don't really want to grip like this because that's when it's easiest to cut yourself. When you cut like this, if anything hits the blade, it's going to be the palm, and that's very unlikely to get cut. Fingers up and away, the like fleshy part of your palm, kind of where the palm meets the fingers, that is what's going to push against the blade. Oh, there you go. That's it. So here I have these nice, like beautiful, even slices. And I haven't really hit the core yet, but if you don't have an apple core, what you could use is a small, this is like my smallest ring cutter, or even a bottle cap. And you can just punch out the core that way. To slice, I'm just gonna try to slice evenly, and I think it's easiest to sort of cut slowly. And I'm just sort of keeping an eye like on both ends of the fruit to see where the knife is. So when you're cutting, now I'm like really in the middle of the core. You can knock away any seeds. You can kind of take a little stack like that and just punch out the cores that way. This is probably the most time-consuming step of the recipe, and I'm just gonna keep going until I've sliced all the apples. I have all my apples sliced, then I have a 1/4 cup of honey. So I'm going to start to layer my apples into my pan, and about 1/4 of the apples, basically what I do is alternate like some apples, some honey, some apples, some honey, just so that the apples get nicely coated. So I'm just gonna kind of take a couple handfuls. So you just wanna like arrange, you don't have to really arrange them at all, but I'm just separating out the slices so that they all get coated. So you wanna just layer about 1/4 of the apples in. And the idea is to do apples, drizzle honey, apples, drizzle some honey, just so they're all coated. It's quite a bit of apples. It's gonna fill a lot of the pan, and they're all gonna really cook down. I really wanna load up the cake with apples. This is not precise. You're just gonna layer them in and alternate the honey. So this honey is a little crystallized. If it's not fluid to pour, just microwave it and kind of melt it. I have a little more than a tablespoon of honey left, and now I'm gonna give it the rest of the honey and just a drizzle of 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Olive oil is the fat in the cake as well. And the olive oil just like helps to prevent the surface of the apples from drying out. And of course, it adds a bit of flavor. So I have my oven on 350. This is gonna go in, and I'm going to roast these every 15 or 20 minutes. I'm gonna come in and just give them like a little fold and a stir to just like prevent the pieces on top from getting really dry, and just to promote even roasting. And then I'm gonna go until they're very tender and some are even starting to like fall apart a little bit. About an hour and 15. It might be more like an hour 15 if you're using like a very, very firm apple, or if your slices are a little bit thicker. But I actually already made a swap and it went for about an hour. These are the apples that I pre-roasted. I wanna show you what they look like. I'm not worried about oxidation and the apples getting brown because the whole cake kind of turns golden brown in the oven. You can see there's a lot of apple, honey, olive oily juices in the bottom. That is good, we want that. The slices are like totally soft and tender. What I wanna do now is set aside maybe like a dozen or so slices of apple, and that's for decorating the surface of the cake. So I'm gonna pick slices that look really nice. Ones with a little bit of red, some with a little bit of green. Some of the slices are kind of starting to break down, so it's kind of like that in between where they're mostly intact, but soft, but not mush. You'll notice among my other ingredients for the cake that I don't have any additional liquid, like I don't have any buttermilk or milk, and that is because the liquid of this cake is actually the apples themselves, and specifically the juices that have accumulated in the bottom of the pan. So that is what is going to give like incredible apple flavor to the cake, is all those juices that are gonna get folded into the batter, as well as the slices. So I'm gonna set this aside and set this aside. Again, keep that parchment paper. That is just like, that is the lining for the pan for the cake. I'm gonna start by mixing the dry ingredients. I have my all-purpose flour. This is my leavening and my salt, baking powder, and baking soda. Then I have my warm spices. It's a small amount of cinnamon, allspice, and ground nutmeg. Apples really kind of want that warm spice. Cardamom would be really, really good. Could like add a pinch of clove, and then it would feel, I think, like very sort of holiday appropriate, but it's up to you. Or you could do just cinnamon. This is not a butter-based cake, so it's not starting with that typical creaming of the butter and sugar together. It's gonna start with my eggs and my sugar. So I have a 1/2 cup of demerara sugar here. You could just use white sugar or brown sugar if that's what you have. I'm gonna crack in my 4 eggs. These are room temp, 4 large eggs. I whisk just to break up the yolks. Then I'm gonna add my 1/2 cup of sugar. I wanna whisk this until everything is really well blended And the mixture has like a little bit of a lighter texture. It'll be a little airier, a little paler. So give it about a minute, vigorous whisking. Should be a little bit moussey, just meaning you have visible fine air bubbles. Now I'm going to stream in the olive oil. If you don't want to use olive oil, you could use any other oil. You could use like vegetable. I guess you could use melted coconut, although I'm not sure flavor-wise. You could use like avocado oil. But I like olive oil in here because I like the flavor. So I'm just slowly streaming it in while whisking constantly, and the oil will emulsify in because of those eggs. And I'll have this like beautiful, smooth, satiny mixture. If you dump it all in at once, then you just sort of have, like, it never really comes together. Okay, now I'm gonna add my other liquid ingredients. I have vanilla extract, so 2 teaspoons, and 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar. And this is going to increase the acidity of the batter, and that is going to react with the baking soda and make like a very light, kind of bouncy, like fluffy cake texture. The dry ingredients go in. So I'm going to whisk this until everything is smooth, and I'll have a relatively thick batter, but still kind of pourable. I'm going to dump in all of the apples except for the slices that I reserved, plus all of the juices. I love how the apples get like this beautiful translucent texture and color. So glossy and very pretty. So leaving that parchment paper in the pan because, again, we're going to bake it right back in here. So now what I want to do is just fold everything together. And I not only want to distribute the apples, but I want to have the batter kind of absorb all of those juices. And I kind of like if some of the slices start to break down a little bit because they just sort of like blend into the cake and make this really tender, like moist texture. It's almost like equal parts apple and batter. The batter has totally absorbed the juices. And now we're just going to scrape it into the pan and top it off. The batter will naturally fill in the pan, but I'm just kind of like pushing down on the surface to make sure it's even. The final touch for assembly is to arrange my reserved slices on top and sprinkle it with 2 tablespoons of demerara sugar. So you cannot mess this part up. It's totally like the more kind of haphazard, the better it looks. I do kind of like the look when there's clusters, like a grouping over here, grouping there, rather than like an even distribution. So the sugar goes on. And I like how, I mean, the sugar just like, it kind of dissolves into the surface of those apple slices and gets this really beautiful shine to it. So that's just a very, really pretty finishing touch. So that's 2 tablespoons. And then this goes into the oven. So that's the whole assembly. And this is going to bake for 40 to 50 minutes. It's going to get nice and tall. I'm going to use a cake tester just to test for doneness in the middle, but the surface is going to get like beautiful golden brown. And I really like how the edges of those pre-roasted apple slices get a little frilly and wavy. It looks really good. Okay. Does smell so good. So I've let it cool in the pan, but because of that parchment, you can see how easy it is just to pop it out. Now, if you made it in a spring form, you just undo the outer ring. It went in the oven for about 50 minutes, 50. I tested it with a cake tester and kind of poked it down in between the apple slices, and it came out clean. And it's been resting for probably, I mean, it's a little warm on the bottom. I could probably wait a bit longer, but it's been resting for about, what do you think, an hour and a half? An hour. So I think it looks really pretty, like kept in the pan with the parchment. And so if you're making this for like a special occasion, it's really easy to transport because you just keep it in the pan and it's sort of protected. The top got very nice and golden brown, and because of the demerara sugar, the areas of batter peeking through got like nice and crunchy. And then the apple slices, they got that beautiful kind of wavy edge, nice golden brown color, and they're so shiny because of the sugar. Some little pieces come off like that. Instead of trying to like slide the whole thing off the parchment, often what I do is I just tear the parchment and like pull the parchment away from the cake. See, just like that. That makes it pretty easy. And then of course it's still on the base of the spring form. I don't have to slide it off of that. I'm just gonna put it on here. Any cake that has a lot of fruit in it tends to have great staying power because the moisture in the fruit prevents the cake from drying out. So that's one thing. It's also an oil-based cake. So the combination of oil plus being packed with all that fruit means that this actually gets better as it sits. So you could definitely eat it same day. I mean, we just baked this and I'm gonna try a piece, but keep it well wrapped, covered on your countertop, and it will improve in flavor over time. I love cakes like that. So it's a great snacking cake, not too sweet. There's no dairy in it, so you can keep it dairy free, but if you don't mind, you could serve it with like a little sweet and sour cream. That kind of thing would be really good. So I'm using a serrated knife to cut slices because you want something serrated to get through those apple slices on the surface. And I can feel just with the knife going through how tender it is. I love the height of the cake, and I just love how many slices of apples there are packed in it. And what I also really want to point out, and this is why we pre-roasted those apples, it's like cake, apple slice, cake, apple slice. It's all just seamlessly integrated, and the cake is fully baked through with no like wet areas. I'm really excited to taste it. There's 2 whole pounds of apples inside. The crumb is so tender, and the slices inside almost become like custardy, which is the texture I love. So this is exactly the kind of recipe that you'll find in What's for Dessert. So we're going to continue to bring you recipes from the book, as well as some other great original dessert person content. And I hope you make this all winter long.